Landing conversation. Hard to believe it's the middle of May, but here we are, and looking forward to a lovely conversation with Mary Adamson today. Mary is a resident here at River Landing and has kindly condescended to come join us. Mary, it's lovely having you. Helen, it's good to see you again this week. And we are about halfway through our spring series and hope that you're enjoying the process. Thanks to those of you that have given us some feedback already. It's all been very nice and very helpful, and we look forward to our ongoing sessions. So, Mary, welcome.
Well, thank you.
It's lovely that you're here.
Oh, well, a little arm twisting, but we're just going to make it fun.
Well, you were very nice about how you let me twist your arm.
You did.
Mary, we know that people here call you Mary, and that is the name you're known by. Is that your true name when you were born, or what was your name that we were given?
Yes, I was Mary. Actually, I was Mary Eileen.
Okay.
And given that, because my mother was Mary, but my mother was Mary Agnes, and I got Mary Eileen. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was Irish. The Eileen came from that. And I like the name. I've enjoyed having it. It was confusing at times as growing up. A lot of times I got called Sissy by the family. My family still calls me Mary Eileen. Made plane reservations one time for my mother and myself, both as Mary Adamson, and they canceled my mother's. So even though I was starting in Pittsburgh and she was starting in New Orleans, how they thought we were the same person, I don't know. But yes.
Wow. Mary, where were you born and where did you grow up?
A lot of people think I didn't grow up, but I should have.
Well, we're making an assumption.
We're making an assumption. I was born in Schenectady, New York. My father was a test engineer with GE at that time. My father was from South Dakota. My mother at that time was a teacher, and they met in Schenectady, married and had 3 kids. And then my father was transferred to Atlanta, Georgia. So we moved to Atlanta with 3 young children. I was 3 at the time, and lived in Atlanta for about 4 years.
Mm-hmm. So would you think, when you think of your sort of hometown, do you think of
no, not Atlanta, but at the end of the 3rd year, my dad was told he was going to be transferred to Charlotte. So being ahead of the game, he sold the house and rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Chamblee. And the 2 months turned into a year. So we had 5 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment. Plus his parents came from South Dakota and stayed a month. So we had 5 of us in 1 bedroom for a month. Oh. So when we finally got out of Atlanta, my father had enough of kids. So he says, we're moving, and we're moving with lots of space. So he bought a 36-acre farm about 15 miles south of Charlotte, which in those days was a long 15 miles, because it was a 2-lane road. With 36 acres, an old farmhouse that had originally been a pre-Civil War log cabin that had just been added on to. It's an interesting old house. And the gentleman who sold it to him, well, you can't live here with 3 kids and not have a cow and a few chickens. So we had a cow and a few chickens. And I lived there from 2nd grade through 8th grade. And it was a delightful, it was a Presbyterian community, actually. We were the only one of 2 Catholic families in the, I am Catholic, by the way, those of you who don't know. 2 Catholic families in the neighborhood. My father was a character, as you will learn in this, but we did all kinds of things. In addition to the cow and the chickens, at some point in time over the years, he came home with goats. He came home with turkeys. We had a number of horses. He did a little bit of horse trading here and there. He came home with pigs, which we used to ride. My brother bought a steer and raised it, and we used to ride poor Curly with a saddle and a bridle. Then we ate Curly and cried. We had ducks. Of course, we had cats and dogs and kittens and all the normal kind of stuff. But it was, and the hard part was my dear, dear mother, who was a saint, by the way. My father traveled a lot with his job. So here's mother out in the country with 3 kids and all this menagerie that she got stuck taking care of. I can remember coming to breakfast one morning, and he had the 2 turkeys on the kitchen stove, dropping whiskey down their gullets because they don't have enough sense to come in out of the cold, and dear mother's trying to fix breakfast with the turkeys on the stove. So that's really where I grew up. And then in terms of, not only was he into all kinds of, he just was a restless human being, but every game, toy you could think of at some point in time we had. And it was badminton, croquet, horseshoes, fencing. We were fencing, boxing gloves, basketball, baseball, water skiing. We bought a boat, plus the horseback riding. We rode in some local horse shows. I have a ribbon somewhere. So, and at some point in time, early on actually, my mother's parents moved down from New York State when my grandfather retired, and they moved into Charlotte. And I'm going to share a picture of them with you. It's my grandmother and grandfather, and my siblings and myself early on. And because they lived in town, my dad worked in town frequently in the summertime, this is where I got my swimming from. We would go into town, be dropped at their house in the morning, and then when the pool opened, we went to the pool, which was in walking distance, and took swimming lessons. So my sister and I both finished through the senior life-saving swimming course with Red Cross over the years. And then we'd go to eat their house for lunch and then go back to the pool. So we spent a lot of time God bless, I was at least 2 or 3 days a week we were with my dear grandparents. So lots of good things, lots of activities, lots of challenges. By the way, my father didn't have to know how to do something in order to teach us how to do it. So we put the water skis on in the boat before we got out, just as an example. So that was my growing up. It was Girl Scouts. It was a wonderful place to grow up. And 3 years of that, my mother and father shuffled us into Charlotte, into Catholic school. But then August of the end of my 4th grade, my younger sister was born, a bit of a surprise. So my mother couldn't, with a newborn, transport us. So they moved us from Catholic school into public school, where we rode the bus. And I was actually in 3 different schools in 4 years. And that was interesting. The kids didn't wear shoes to school, and so we took ours off and left them on the school bus, much to my Yankee mother's chagrin. And so anyway, but by the time I got to 8th grade, I had started playing basketball. And I have a shot of myself playing basket dress with my long, skinny legs, which used to exist. And that was a good 15 miles each way to pick me up from practice. And so 1 year of that, my dad said, that's it, we're moving where they can walk to school. So we moved into the city of Charlotte at that point in time. And within a mile walk, I need to cut that part, a mile walk of Charlotte Catholic High School. So the 4 years of high school were at Charlotte Catholic High School. But my growing up was Charlotte, yeah.
Most of the residents here have moved with jobs and around and so forth. You've taken us through your high school years. Where did you live just prior to coming to River Landing?
Prior to here, I was in Pine Knoll Shores, down at the coast of North Carolina, a beautiful little community that I didn't even know it existed when I found it to retire there. So I moved here directly from Pine Knoll Shores, which is Morehead City. Emerald Isle, and most people know Emerald Isle.
Emerald Isle,
Beach.
Yeah,
a wonderful community, and very open.
And how long have you been at River Landing?
5 years in this past January, it's a little over 5 years.
A seasoned veteran.
A seasoned veteran, I got it all.
We know that you have experiences in many fields, as we've heard some here already. Would you mind sharing with us you've gone to high school, but your education and how you went about after you graduated?
Sure. High school, I was actually taught by the Sisters of Mercy, a wonderful group of women out of Belmont, North Carolina. when I started teaching, realized how amazing they were, what courses they taught us and what they covered with the few people they had. At that point in time, Charlotte Catholic was small. I was one of a graduating class of 48. So now it's in the thousands, but in those days we were a very small school. And by the time I got into my senior year, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. And at that point, I made the decision that I wanted to be a religious sister. To me, in my mind, that was the best path for me to follow in order to do what I thought God expected of me or wanted from me, best way to live my life. So I had made that decision. My dad was a convert and was not the least bit pleased with my decision. So he said that he insisted that I wait 1 year and go to Chapel Hill, where the men outnumbered the women 12-1. He thought this would fix this problem. So I went to Chapel Hill for my freshman year in college. And after that, I never asked him again whether I could or not. I thought, okay, I did what you said. And I knew he knew. I knew my mother told him. And he sort of felt the Sisters of Mercy had pressured me. So just to show him that wasn't true, I went to the Sisters of St. Joseph in Philadelphia, at Chestnut Hill in Philadelphia. I knew them. My mother taught at St. Anne's in Charlotte, and so I knew them from her teaching with them there, but they never taught me. But the Sisters of St. Joseph, for those of you who are from North Carolina, have been in the state of North Carolina, that particular group, since the late 40s, and has staffed Charlotte Catholic High School, St. Leo's, and Bishop McGinnis in Winston-Salem. They staffed Immaculate Heart of Mary School here in High Point for a number of years, and St. Thomas More in Chapel Hill. And there's still a number of them present within the state. So they've been very, very good to the state of North Carolina. So I took off then after my freshman year of college, off to Philadelphia, not knowing anybody, rode the train overnight. The funny part was we had to buy all this stuff to take with us. And the sisters in Charlotte were in Philadelphia for the summer, so there was nobody here to guide us on what to buy and what not to buy. And we just had this list, which apparently had been around for 50 years and was a bit archaic. And had the nuns been there to explain it to us, it would have been a lot simpler, but we didn't know that. And I'm sure there's a lot of funny stories, but this one, you had to have black Oxford. So I'm a kid, okay, and I had big feet, trying to buy black Oxfords in Charlotte. And I called Belk's, I remember, and I asked them if they had them in my size. And they said, oh, yes, they did. So I go in to buy the shoes, and the first clerk says, let me get the lady you talked to on the phone. So the lady comes, and she says, oh, ma'am, she says, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were buying them for somebody else. She says, you ain't going to like them. I know you ain't going to like them. She just couldn't fathom a teenager wearing these black shoes. And then they had little eyelets on them, so I told her they were too fancy. Well, that threw her again. Then we went to a second. There were only 2 shoe stores in Charlotte that carried my size. The second one, she says, are these for institutional wear? And I said, yes, they are. So she had kind of half figured it out. But that whole shopping and packing and getting all that stuff together was an adventure. So I entered the community in the fall of 1962. I had 2 years of formation, which is a postulant and a novitiate. And then I went out to teach. And I will share a picture of you in my this is what we wore to start with when we first began at our habits, which changed over the years. A bit imposing, especially at my 6 foot tall with another 4 inches on top of my head. So after the novitiate, we took some college classes during the novitiate, not very many. By the way, there were 90 of us that entered together at the same time. Now, if they get one every 3 years, that's good. But there were 90 of us, mostly straight out of high school. And we were the first ones that they did psychological testing before they admitted us. And we've laughed over the years that they messed up and sent the wrong letters. We were supposed to be the region. We had a great group of women. We had a good time, and we drove them crazy because we stuck together so much. So anyway, after 2 years of formation, I was sent out to teach at St. Athanasius Parochial School. In those days, parochial schools in Philadelphia were no tuition, and mostly taught by religious sisters. My first year, I had 5th grade. I had up to 72 kids in my classroom and taught 13 different subjects. And then the next year I went to the 6th grade, and the next year I went to the 7th grade. So each year I had all new preparations. In the meantime, I am going to college in the summers and on Saturdays. And because I was a chemistry major, I was in lab all Saturday afternoon. I look back and think, how did I manage to do all that prep and grade all those papers? There was no machine grading in those days. And keep up with classes and survive it. But I did. And good support. I have to say, you all know me pretty well, most of you here. I cut some corners. I'm in charge of a community room which had 26 chairs in it to dust every week. Well, I was up against a wall on Friday afternoon. I didn't have time to dust all those chairs. So I took pledge, and I just gave a little air spray to pledge. And the superior came through, and she said, "Oh, sister, your charge looks so nice." And I said, "Thank you, Mother." And somebody else brought up, reminded me, I was also, with the second year I was teaching, we got the first time permission to drive. So I was one of the very few experienced drivers in the house. So frequently after school, I was driving somebody to a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment or whatever. So that was another hunk of my time. And one Friday afternoon, the principal came to me and she said, "I'll watch your class. I need you to take a visiting sister home." I said, "Oh, okay." Well, the visiting sister lived in Alexandria, Virginia. So I was to run her home after school and then come back in time to go to Saturday school the next morning. Youth is wonderful, you know, it really is. So I taught 4 years there at St. Athanasius, and then I was transferred to Norwood Academy, which was a private boys' academy, and was tuition. So there were very high expectations there in terms of education. But the classes were much smaller, and it was a wonderful school. It's still there. It's been there forever, and wonderful students and graduates and faculty. So I spent 4 years there teaching 5th to 8th grade, mostly math and science at that point. And then at the end of that, I finally, in 1972, 10 years later, finished my undergraduate degree. And the sisters ran Chestnut Hill College, and for the most were the majority of the faculty at the school. And the faculty were beginning to age, so they decided they needed some younger faculty, so they asked several of us if we would pursue advanced education in order to come back and teach.
Let me ask you, Mary, this, because I realized just listening to you that there's a part of recent history that I don't know. You could teach in high school without a degree, or you did teach?
I didn't teach high school. I taught middle school, 5th to 8th grade, but yes, without a degree.
Without a degree. And presumably that changed somewhere along the way.
Oh, yeah, it changed, yes, that whole parochial system changed a lot.
Was that just in the parochial system, or was the public system the same? Do you know?
The public system was the same early on.
Yeah,
Early on, yeah.
Interesting.
If you go back, I mean, my mother was trained as a teacher, and it was a 2-year training program.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. But we were trained to teach. We had classes in teaching, and we were supervised and watched. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting that what's amazing to me is I have kept up with a number of my students over the years and how well they've done.
Yeah.
Of course, in those days, you know, you could discipline them, and if you discipline them, their parents disciplined them.
Yeah.
So it was a whole different atmosphere in terms of, you couldn't do it in this day and age at all, right?
You'd be in jail before you.
Yeah, you'd be out of jail once ago. We didn't really beat the kids as much as people think we did, but every once in a while, but all you had to do was smack one kid one time, and that was it. They didn't mess with you. They were good kids. They were wonderful kids.
Somehow that didn't work with the Irish presentation.
You got smacked more than one. How many smacks did you have?
So how long were you in Philadelphia?
So that would have been about 10 years at that point in time. So, and then I actually had choice of what I wanted to do for my graduate work, but I chose chemistry, and I won't tell you the details, but I have to say I did connive in order to come back to North Carolina to Chapel Hill. So I was able to return to the University of North Carolina with some work on my part and be at Chapel. So if anybody was in Chapel Hill in the 70s and saw nuns run around in habits, moi, I was one of those. And of course, it's a bit different being in a habit in North Carolina than it was being in a habit in Philadelphia. And that we got stared at, and we got looked at, and we
Yeah.
got asked if we could fly, and et cetera, et cetera. I lived with one sister who it just absolutely upset her to be stared at the way we were and looked at. And we made the mistake, I would say, of going to the state fair one year. Well, Chapel Hill is rather cosmopolitan compared to the crowd at the state fair. And so, I mean, we were really on this, and this nun looked at me and she said, you know, I think if we built a booth, we could make more money than the world's smallest horse. So anyway, so I had 5 years in Chapel Hill, wonderful faculty, wonderful support and help. I never would have gotten through it without the faculty and people I had. And so I did it, I finished it. I don't know that I would have had I not been asked to by the community and expected to do it. So somewhere here I have a picture of my share of myself in my habit and my gown for graduation. And then upon completion of that, then I went to Cheston Hill to teach. So that was my end of my North Carolina. And that turned out just not to be a good spot for me. I lived with 450 kids, girls, and 54 nuns. And after 5 years in North Carolina, which was sort of open, and then to come back to the conservative Philadelphia in this confined environment, it just didn't fit. And I enjoyed the teaching, I enjoyed the students, I still keep up with a couple of them. But I realized there was no way I could do this the rest of my life and not turn out to be a grouchy old nun, and I didn't want to be a grouchy old nun. So that, I don't know whether I shared that picture. Anyway, at that point in time, I made the decision the best thing for me to do would be to leave the community. So, and they agreed with me. There was no just back and forth. It was, this is good, this is what you need to do. And so I did, and pursued the next piece of my life. Do you want the next piece?
That begs the question.
And where did you go from there?
All right, so here I am. I actually taught 2 years of college and 1 year of high school. And when I left the community, I was in school on Friday morning in a habit and left Friday after school. It was the end of the school year. Packed up. A friend who had left before me was very kind and came and drove with me to West Virginia. I took a job. I had several job offers, but the one in West Virginia just seemed to be the best fit. Of course, when I went for the interview, they expected me to show up in a habit, which they were they couldn't find me in the airport because they. And at that point, everything I owned fit in the back of a pickup truck, and I was still wearing a habit up to the day, so I had very little in the way of clothes. So fortunately, at the plant in West Virginia was a Mobay Chemical, which was part of Bayer or Bayer worldwide, and the first manufacturers of polyurethanes in the U.S. And Mobay very nicely supplied me with 7 sets of khakis and 3 pair of steel-toed shoes and a hard hat and a jacket, so I needed no wardrobe. So I've included a picture of me in my outfit from day one there at Mobay. And I was hired as an environmental research chemist, and my degree is in theoretical physical chemistry. So I had no environmental background, but this was in 1980, and most people didn't. It was just starting to become an issue. But they were also under some pressure from the government to hire women. So I was the second professional woman hired in this plant of 1,600.
Wow.
And so that was my first 4 years, was doing environmental, and we serviced the other Mobay sites around the country. We were a corporate group.
And was that an issue, being a woman in a, what am I trying to say, with just 2 of you in a very male environment? Was that?
Well, you wonder how I got so crusty, and in West Virginia chemical plant, harassing people was an art form. I mean, they pulled pranks here, there, and everywhere, and I could tell you lots that they pulled on me. But first of all, I grew up with my father, who was a character, so I had learned to go with the flow and be pretty. And they were very kind. Now, there was one guy, every time I met him in the hall, I got, "Hail, Mary." And somebody was going to build a confessional between one office and another. But no, I really didn't. The only problem I had was not personally me, but it was just in order to be promoted to a certain level in the organization, you had to spend 2 or 3 years in Germany at the headquarters. So I asked to take German language class, and they said, oh, no, women don't go to Germany. You don't need to learn German, which essentially was just blatant discrimination. I mean, I could not be promoted above a certain level because I was female. I did a lot to educate this group of people. Besides being all male, it was also very German, so they were between the two of them. But they were good to me. I mean, they really were. And West Virginians are a delightful group of people, very kind, and they took me into their homes for supper and out and here, and it worked. It was a major adjustment. I won't say it wasn't, but I don't think I could have landed in a better place. There was one job I interviewed with in New Orleans. The gentleman didn't want to hire me because he felt if he enabled me to leave the convent, he was going to go to hell. Oh. I thought, I don't think I could work for this guy. So anyway, I'm looking here at pictures that I have in front of me that I want to share, and I see I missed one, so may I digress to include that one? Because our friend Brian has insisted, and Hilda Berry has insisted that I include this shot. About 1969 or so, we went frequently growing up. We drove from Charlotte or Atlanta to South Dakota and New Mexico to visit my grandparents, and my aunt lived in New Mexico. So we made that cross-country trip frequently. And it was quite a trip. And then in high school, I got sent out there by myself for a month to take care of my grandfather when he broke his hip. In this day and age, you would never send a 15-year-old 3 days on the train by themselves overnight, changing planes in Chicago, et cetera. But the last trip out there, I was in the community, and I went with my parents, and we were in Edgemont, South Dakota, where there is nothing. So one of the things we did for entertainment was go out to the dump and target shoot. So I have included a picture of myself target shooting in the dump at Edgemont. None with a gun, as Brian likes to call it. And that was actually the last time I saw my grandfather had passed away at that time. That was the last time I saw my dear grandmother, who was becoming senile at that time. And I was in a black habit, and it was 100 degrees. And she kept saying, "Sweetie, I think if you wore a white dress instead of that black dress, you would go to heaven just the same." And then a few hours later, "Sweetie," she had a hard time with that black habit in there. My father wasn't real happy about me going out there either. But anyway, okay, that was a big backtrack. But we'll go back to Mobay Chemical. After 4 years in environmental, the company decided that they needed to upgrade the technical skills of the frontline supervisors. This was 109 men and 1 woman who was a supervisor in the plant. They had a 800-hour training program in Germany for the same position. In the U.S., we had probably a 2-week training program. So they decided these guys, and so when I heard about it, I thought, I'd love that job. First of all, it was a promotion. The job I was in, they were just a small group and pretty confined, and that's not me. So anyway, I applied for it, and I got it. And so I had 110 frontline supervisors and teach them math, chemistry, and physics, and then get some engineering taught. So I did that for 5 years. That was a great challenge. Good stories there, but we'll skip those. And then from there, I moved to corporate headquarters in Pittsburgh, supposedly to put that program in the rest of the sites. But in the meantime, Bayer decided to put all their 28 sites in the U.S. under one management system and one company and change the name to Miles and then to Bayer. And my job was gone. So I ended up doing all kinds of different things for my 10 years in Pittsburgh. The last 3 or 4 years were process safety audits where I was going to all the plant sites, seeing that they were following OSHA regs and training them. Did a lot of training, a lot of teaching. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of that time, they were downsizing, and I got downsized, much to my chagrin. And in hindsight, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I think I'd have been dead if I'd have stayed in that toxic work environment for another few years. So I thought, I'm not going to be poor in Pittsburgh. So I packed up and moved to North Carolina, back to Pine Knoll Shores. Got a job at the community college as an academic support tutor for 7 years, and then retired from that. 7 years volunteered as a tutor at the middle school, and then did a lot of private tutoring for middle and high school students. Then I found River Landing, and here I came. That's a long story, but it has such a varied career. Hard to condense it.
The folks here that know you, I mean, before we've heard all your background, knew a good bit about you just from talking to you and so forth. But what one thing they don't know that you would like to tell them?
I tell them two.
Yeah, sure,
I'll
sure.
be quick. Well, one thing is that you will be very surprised to know is I won the Betty Crocker Award when I was in high school. Most athletic and Betty Crocker Award, but it was a written test. And the second thing is, while I was working at the chemical plant in West Virginia, I worked a strike, which we were locked in for 2 weeks, and I was drumming polyol, which is an ingredient for polyurethanes. Hot, 100 degrees. And the guy was driving the forklift, and I was lifting barrels, and I thought, this is not going to happen. So anyway, I learned to drive a fork truck, so I can now drive a fork truck. So those are two things you may not know about me, but that's...
Well, if the construction crews are
yeah.
out here, a little supervising, maybe you can revisit that part of the world. Mary, if things were taken care of, that a little magic happened, who are 3 people in time that you would like to have a visit with?
I'd like to
and
have
why?
a visit with. You can pick many. Brian will probably like this one as well, but Dean Smith is one person I highly admired. He was a basketball coach at Carolina for years. Just a fine gentleman, a good man, a caring man, interesting man, and I would love to sit down and chat with him. I've actually met him once, but I would love to sit with him. The second, Pope Francis. I highly admire him as well. I think he's an amazing, good, holy, caring, open-minded person, and it would be wonderful to have some time with him. And the third one would be my mother's mother, my grandmother, because she immigrated from Ireland in her late teens, and all the time I spent with her, I was never interested to know what and why and what she endured doing that and how she came to do it. And it would be nice now as an adult to learn her story. So those 3 of many.
Indeed.
Well, we thank you very much for all your candor and your life growing up, and it's been very enjoyable.
Can I tell my 2 experiences?
Yes. Tell your two.
Tell my 2.
tell your 2
One of the questions
experiences,
that
Mary.
I've talked too long to answer, but I'll quickly go through, is asked me was, what 2 things have you experienced at River Landing that you would like to share? And I would, because they were wonderful events. One of which was, I had surgery 3 years ago. I was supposed to go to Wingfoot on discharge, but they had a flu hit the place, and there were some very sick residents in Wingfoot, so there was no place to put me. And somehow, River Landing management staff stopped the refurbishing of an apartment in Muirfield, got furniture in there, TV, chair, and got me in there, and took care of me for the couple of days. That touched me. And the second one was kind of funny. We were in here, this is before Brian, and we had entertainment from a couple who volunteered to come and entertain us. They were bad. I mean, they were really bad. And I looked around, and I just wanted to get up and walk out. And I looked around, and here sits the rest of River Landing, clapping appropriately, smiling appropriately, and I thought, I live with the nicest people in the whole world. If they can endure this, I can endure it. So those were 2 things that I thought I'd like to share with you about
Wonderful. And is there anything, the final thing, I guess, is there anything as you thought about coming here that we haven't asked that you thought you might like to talk about?
Oh, well, we didn't talk too much about hobbies and travels and those kinds of things, but I did a lot. I was very fortunate. My brother spent his whole career overseas. So everywhere he moved, I moved, and I've done a lot of travel and love to travel. Hobbies-wise, of course, the swimming has been with me for a lifetime. Took up golf when I first left the convent, and then that was so frustrating, I started playing tennis instead. But I've tried all kinds of things. Other than that, no, you've pretty much covered it, or I've covered it. You didn't get to say much.
You've covered it very well and very elegantly.
Thank you.
So Mary, thank you for joining us. Thank you in the audience, wherever you're looking from, for joining us too. And at the same time next week, we will be back with another River Landing conversation. Good afternoon.
Thank you for listening. If you want to know more, I'll be glad to share it privately.